Growing your own fruit is one of the hottest topics in gardening, and the trees are in the store right now. So if you want to make the right picks, we're going to talk to Jim Khamis. Our old friend is going to be talking about fruit trees, how to grow them, and the varieties to grow as well. Welcome back to the show, Jim.
Thanks, Tom. Good to be here.
And we're going to talk about planting first. People will be heading out to the nurseries during this month, and they're going to see lots of those bare root trees that have just come into the stores. Let's talk about bare root tree planting. What are some of the best tips for people to bear in mind?
Well, planting bare root trees is pretty much the traditional way of establishing fruit orchards and plantings. And there's one adage that's still held to be true, that a dry root is a dead root. So the most important thing is when you're handling dormant bare root nursery material, don't let the roots dry out.
Yeah.
You can take that to the extreme as well, as you don't want to just soak it in water for hours or days at a time, but you want to make sure it's surrounded by moist media like sand or peat or something, just to keep the roots moist, keep them from drying out.
Right, and that's before you plant.
Correct.
So be on the lookout at how they're stored. When people plant bare root trees, what's the best tip in terms of the hole itself? You know, I know when you're digging a container, you dig it really wide and no deeper than the pot. What's the tip for
I like to dig a hole probably about 30% bigger than the root ball that I'm going to be putting into the ground. The way you can spread the roots out, you can backfill with lots of loose soil. And the other important thing is to make sure you replant that tree at the same level it was grown at in the nursery. And when you're looking at bare root plant material, you can see the distinct color change where the ground line was. So just make sure it stays there.
Okay, very good. And you know, there's been this long time suggestion that when you plant them, you should prune them. Is that the best way to go?
Yes, and the reason for that is you have to think about when the plant was dug out of the nursery, it's lost a percentage of its roots. So we normally think to plant, when you plant a bare rooted tree, to cut it back by about 1/3. Now how you cut it back is going to depend on the fruit species, but 1/3 is a good rule of thumb.
Well, for existing trees, this is also the time for pruning, if for example, peaches, right?
Sure. Yep. Anytime after a long, hard freeze, you can prune, but typically we like to wait as long as possible and be able to get everything pruned before bud break. But so don't rush into it. But just depends on how many trees you have.
Okay, I think I've been rushing. I like to do that kind of pruning in the end of January. Is that a good time?
Perfect. The trees are fully dormant.
On pruning existing trees, it's really a matter of which kind of tree in terms of the approach, right?
Correct. You have different kinds of trees. We select different kinds of training systems. And the whole idea, though, with all of them is light interception. You want to make sure that the bearing surface where you're trying to produce fruit gets good sun exposure.
Yeah, and not all of them have to be pruned.
No, not all. A lot of things like persimmons don't get pruned. Many times citrus doesn't get pruned.
Yeah, okay. These are really great tips. Now, a lot of folks out there are anxious to have fruit, but they don't have deep soil, or they may not even have a yard. They may only have like a back patio, and they're thinking about putting one in a container. What's the reality about planting fruit in those kind of tight spaces, raised beds or containers?
Well, I think you have to think in realistic terms about what you can and cannot do. Things like blueberries and with the appropriate kind of media, or blackberries, strawberries, all of those are very conducive to be grown in small spaces.
Right.
When you get to larger stature trees like pecans and pears, it's probably not the best choice. And where you can, things like pomegranates can be grown in small spaces. And where you can, some kinds of fruit species like plums, you can get dwarfing rootstocks. All of those kinds of things help. So, yeah, just you can substitute quality of soil for quantity of soil, but be realistic with your expectations.
Yeah, I have a pineapple guava in a big pot back home.
Absolutely.
And that's a good candidate for something like that.
It sure is. Yep.
A shrub instead of a tree.
It is, and something tender like a pineapple guava, if the temperature is going to be really extremely low, you can move it if it's in a container.
Okay. You know, other considerations when folks head out to get fruit trees is pollinators, because some fruit trees require two trees of different varieties to pollinate back and forth. Others do not. What are some good rules of thumb there?
Well, the pome fruits, apples, pears, and quinces, while they all maybe somewhat self-fruitful, they really all benefit from having another tree variety blooming at the same time. in the presence so that pollen transfer between varieties can take place. So if you're choosing an apple or a pear, try and pick one that has the same chilling requirement as the one that's there, so they do bloom at the same time.
Yeah, well, you mentioned chilling requirements, and we've been all over the map
Yes, we
recently.
Yeah, 2 years ago was the warmest winter in memory. We had around 500 hours of chilling in Fredericksburg. We normally get about 850. This past year we had over 1,000 hours of chilling, and predictions are for a good chilling year this year. So again, we had talked, our averages are made up of extremes, and while our averages are staying about the same, we're seeing our extremes get a little more widespread.
And for those who've never heard of chilling hours, just describe why we're concerned.
Inside a dormant bud of deciduous fruit trees are growth inhibitors that prevent growth during pretty fall weather. So what breaks those growth inhibitors down is cool, damp temperatures. So you know, typically we say temperatures below 45 degrees Fahrenheit, but the old fruit growers, when it's like 35 degrees outside and raining, people say there's two kinds of people that like that kind of weather. That's duck hunters and fruit growers, because you know you're getting good chilling.
Okay, very good. You could bring your gun out while you're looking for ducks in the orchard. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about just growing the fruit trees themselves. We've talked about pruning. A lot of people are very anxious when they buy a tree or a shrub and they want that fruit to come right away. What is a reasonable expectation for some of the major varieties of fruit in terms of when they
for
produce?
things like the brambles, the berries, raspberries, blackberries, you typically have some fruit the second year after you've planted them. Other fruit species like pears, pecans, some of those varieties take 7, 8, 9 years to come into production. So I think that's something good to do, to look into a variety. How precocious is it?
Yeah.
Because it ranges all over the map. Grapevines, peach trees, you normally expect half crop in the 3rd year, full crop in the 4th year. Apples, it depends on the rootstock they're grown in. And again, everything is dependent on how well you take care of these trees.
I've grown peaches, and I was really amazed by the second year. They were really productive.
Yep, you can. If you are aggressive and grow a big tree, you can get fruit the second year. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, people, when they start growing fruit, there's the benefit, the reward of harvest, but there are also frustrations that people experience.
Oh yeah.
A fruit drop, or what we term as abortion of the fruit.
Correct.
That's something that a lot of people experience. What's behind that?
Well, it depends on the fruit species and the year. We can generalize and say it's stress. So realize that when a flower blooms, pollination has to take place, and many times a small vestigial fruit can be there. If pollination didn't actually take place, that's typically where we see the first drop.
Okay.
Second thing is
And it'd be small berry-like fruit.
yes, that's the size of your little finger, right?
Right.
And if pollination does take place and there's a spring frost and it kills the embryo, well, the fruit may be retained for a while and then ultimately will drop or simply not ripen. And so that's another kind of abortion. When we go to things like figs that are really fairly fickle and really like stable weather conditions, anything, excessive heat, excessive cold, or more specifically water, too much water, too little water, all of these things will cause a massive drop of fruit in the middle of the summer, and it catches a lot of people by surprise.
Well, as tough as figs are, that surprises me a little bit.
It is. They're tough, and it's hard to kill one, but then keeping the fruit on it's kind of like a dance. You really, the porridge, not too hot, not too cold. You have to have just the right moisture conditions. So for things like figs, many times we recommend that you heavily mulch them to help maintain just a static, constant moisture level in the soil.
One fruit tree that has become very popular are pomegranates, but there's a disease that's impacting them, and you've had experience with this.
Yes,
Let's talk a little bit about this rot that's affecting pomegranates.
Yeah, it's a rot called heart rot, and in this part of the United States, it's called by a fungus called Alternaria. Very, very difficult, and one of the problems is that there are no fungicides labeled for pomegranates in the United States. Actually, there are some biorational fungicides that have just come on the market.
When you say biorational, explain what that means.
They're derivatives of other fungi that have antagonistic effects. So they're not classical chemical fungicides. They're biological products that can work in some conditions. And we did extensive testing of some of these biorational products on pomegranates this last year, and we had very disappointing results. Did not get any control of the heart rot.
Well, I'm sorry about that. And I love pomegranates, and just learning how to eat them actually recently.
They can be a challenge to get into, yes.
It's interesting, but very tasty once you get the trait. Real quickly, fertilizing new trees and existing ones.
The one thing that I would suggest is if you're using traditional fertilizers, realize that they're salts. And the last thing you want is to have a big salt shock on the root system of a newly planted tree. So my guess would be don't get into a hurry. Go ahead and plant it, get it watered in, get it out growing where you have 4 to 6 inches of shoot growth. And small frequent amounts of nitrogen are probably whether you use organic sources of nitrogen, inorganic, compost, all of those things make sense. Just make sure that the small frequent amounts of nitrogen. And in terms of other elements, do a soil test. If you need them, you can add them later.
All right, well, Jim, we have to wrap it up on that note. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
Anytime, Tom, pleasure.
Okay, great to see you. And coming up next, it's Daphne.